Commander Orion Slate stood at the helm of the Resolute, his warship silently gliding through the cold vacuum of space. His eyes, piercing and unyielding, gazed across the bridge's large viewport, surveying the stars that twinkled in the distance. But his mind was not in the vastness of space. It was deep within the minds of his enemies, reading them like open books. The Galactic War had been raging for over a decade, but the tides had shifted ever since Slate had unlocked his unique ability, analyzing the neural patterns and psychological tendencies of his foes. This was no mere intuition. It was a surgical dissection of their thoughts, instincts, and fears. He didn't just anticipate their moves. He understood their every thought, their next attack, even their hesitation before they themselves knew it. "Commander, we're approaching the Gorian blockade," Lieutenant Halford reported, her voice steady, though there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. Slate's presence was intimidating. His crew knew of his abilities, but it unnerved them to work under a man who could predict not only his enemies' movements, but perhaps even their own. Slate nodded, his voice calm but firm. "Keep us at a distance. The Gorians will attempt to flank us, but they'll hesitate at the last moment. That's when we'll strike." The bridge was silent for a moment. The Gorians were notorious for their ruthlessness in combat, rarely hesitating in battle. Halford exchanged glances with a few other officers, their skepticism visible. But Slate didn't need to reassure them. His track record spoke louder than any words could. "Ready the pulse cannons. We'll take them by surprise," he said, his mind already unraveling the strategy of the Gorian commander on the other side of the battlefield. Within moments, the Gorian ships shifted formation, moving to flank the Resolute, just as Slate had predicted. The crew watched in awe as their commander's calm instructions guided them through the unfolding battle with surgical precision. And then, at the exact moment Slate had foreseen, the Gorian fleet hesitated. "Fire," Slate ordered, his voice cold and precise. The pulse cannons unleashed a barrage of energy, decimating the Gorian ships before they could even begin their attack. After the battle, Slate retreated to his quarters, the quiet hum of the ship's engines a distant noise in the background. His mind, however, was still deep in thought. He couldn't afford to rest. The next move would come from the Litherians, a race known for their strategic cunning and patience. Slate had studied their leaders, memorized their patterns, but something about their latest maneuvers was off. Lieutenant Halford entered, her face set with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Commander, the crew is asking about the next step. The Litherians are holding position near the asteroid belt. Are we preparing for an attack?" Slate turned slowly to face her, his eyes narrowing slightly.
"No."
"They're waiting." "For what?" "For me to make the wrong move." Halford frowned, unsure. "But you always know their next move." "You always." "Not this time," Slate interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. He had felt it in the last engagement with the Litherians. Something was different. Their patterns had shifted. Their commanders weren't thinking in the predictable ways they used to. They were learning, adapting, and that made them dangerous. For the first time in a long while, Slate felt the beginnings of uncertainty creep into his mind. But he couldn't let the crew see it. "Not yet. Prepare the stealth fighters. We'll move silently through the asteroid field and approach them from the blind side." "But what if they—" "Trust me," Slate said, though this time it felt like more of a command than a certainty. The crew followed his orders without question, but Slate could sense the growing tension. They were used to victories, to flawless strategies. This time, something felt different. As the Resolute moved through the asteroid field, the tension on the bridge was palpable. Slate sat at his command chair, eyes closed, deep in concentration. He reached out with his mind, scanning the Litherian fleet, trying to find the cracks in their armor. But the usual clarity he found when reading their minds was foggy. Halford approached cautiously. "Sir, the fighters are in position." Slate opened his eyes, his face as unreadable as ever. "Good. Hold them until I give the signal." But before he could finish the command, the ship rocked violently. The Litherians had anticipated their move. "Evasive maneuvers," Halford shouted, the bridge erupting into a frenzy. Slate stood, gripping the edge of the console. The Lithirian's patterns had shifted completely. His mind struggled to catch up, to adapt as they had, but the advantage was gone. For the first time in his career, Slate found himself reacting, not leading. "Retreat to defensive positions," he ordered, his voice still commanding, but with a new edge of urgency. The ship's shields flared as they absorbed another barrage of fire. The once unstoppable force of humanity's most feared commander now faced a foe he could no longer predict. In the chaos, Slate's mind raced. The Lithirians had found a way to block his ability, to mask their intentions. He had never imagined it was possible. For the first time in years, Slate was in the dark. Desperation crept into the minds of the crew as the Resolute struggled to hold its ground. But Slate wasn't finished. If he couldn't read the enemy, he would have to do something he had not done in years: take a gamble. "They've adapted," Slate said to Halford, his voice now sharp with urgency. "But they've made a mistake." Halford blinked in confusion. "What mistake?" "They're underestimating our resolve. They think we'll retreat, that we'll play by their rules." Slate straightened, his mind racing not to analyze but to anticipate what a commander, now blinded, could do. He activated the comms. "All ships, prepare for a full frontal assault. We'll charge right through their center." Halford's eyes widened. "That's suicide. They'll never expect it," Slate said, a grim smile forming. "And it's our only shot." The fleet moved as one, following Slate's audacious command. The Lithirians, confident in their new advantage, failed to anticipate the sheer audacity of the attack. Slate's gamble paid off, their defenses buckling under the unexpected assault. In the aftermath, as the Lithirian ships drifted in ruin, Slate stood alone on the bridge. His mind was exhausted, his once flawless strategies now tempered by hard-won humility. He had won, but the galaxy had changed. And so had he. I hope you had a good time. If you liked my story, do not forget to comment and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye, see you in the next story.